Hey everybody, it's Dr. Dave Psychiatry. Thanks for coming to the YouTube channel today. Reminding you that if medication fixes your problem, that makes it a medical problem, not a mental problem. I hope that's encouraging to all of you. Today I'm going to talk about a medicine called Rexulti. And the story, how this sort of happened, is a little bit interesting. I had a woman come in yesterday and she said, "Hey doc, I need a boost." I said, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "Well, I saw the commercial for this thing that talks about a boost." And I said, "Is that the Rexulti commercial?" And she said, "Yeah, that's exactly it." I said, "I saw that this weekend while I was watching television. I think it was, I was either watching the golf tournament or I might have been watching the King of Queens on Cozy TV or whatever. But I saw an ad for this medicine called Rexulti. And what was interesting to me about it is that underneath the word Rexulti, which is the brand name for this medication, I'm used to seeing in parentheses the generic. Well, there was no generic on this. I thought, well, that's weird. You'd think they'd have to put everything on an ad, because on ads, they put everything. You know, you might have this, you might have this. They put all the side effects. You know, you might die. They lay out all the possible side effects for everybody. And I would have assumed that they would have to put the name of the medicine on the commercial ad. Well, at least on this one, they did not. Underneath the word Rexulti, it simply said, "Ask your doctor." So I paused it for a while. I was thinking about this, and I said, I don't use Rexulti. I know it's a brand name medicine. It's really expensive because it's still a brand name, and so I'm just going to wait till it comes out in generic, which turns out this is the early spring of 2026, and it is just about to go generic. But I was like, I don't even really have any experience with this medicine at all. Even as a board certified psychiatrist, I typically, as I've said before, I try to not use medicines that are brand name unless forced to, because they're so expensive, and insurance companies typically don't like to pay for medicine that in cash is going to be $1,000 or $1,500 a month. It's just something that most people can't even contemplate. So, not knowing a lot about Rexulti, I was just staring at the screen, and it says at the bottom of this, of the captured frozen screen of Rexulti, "Ask your doctor," it has the name Otsuka. And I said, wait a second, I know that name, Otsuka. They're the guys that developed and market Abilify. So these are the Abilify people. Now, not too long ago, I did a video on Abilify. So this turns out the medicine brexpiprazole, which should have been in the parentheses, Rexulti, is a, quote, sister compound to Abilify. Now, how do you have a sister compound, and how does that really work? And maybe sister compound's the wrong term, but very, very similar medication. And the long and short of it is another dopamine suppressor. So if you have the problem of overthinking, too much dopamine, if your dopamine's supposed to be here and it's up here, well, if it's can't shut my mind off, worry, bipolar symptoms, can't things go too fast for me, can't stop worrying about things, all the way up to, you know, if you imagine up to the ceiling with the excess amount of dopamine, where you have delusions, hear voices, believe things that aren't true, which average people call crazy and which doctors call psychosis. Well, brexpiprazole is yet another medicine that is a dopamine suppressor intended to bring your dopamine down if you make too much dopamine. So same category as Zyprexa, Risperdal, Latuda, Geodon, and Abilify. And so whenever I'm worried about somebody making too much dopamine, well, what do I look for? I look for something to push down dopamine. Now, I use Abilify, and what's interesting to me about this is I had no idea that this was very close to the same medicine. So here's what happens in the pharmaceutical world. If you have a really good product, and Otsuka had a really good product with Abilify, well, once it goes generic, what do you try to do? You try to develop things that are similar to it. At least they're going to get the same impact. And without going too deep into the organic chemistry, because this is not an organic chemistry channel, if you've seen the video on the key analogy, medicines are like locks and keys. And so aripiprazole, which is Abilify, has this long chain structure, and I'll put the name on it. If you want to Google search an image, you can get an image of aripiprazole, and You can also get one for brexpiprazole, which is what Rexulti is. And basically, you imagine the medicine like being a long key, and at the very end of the key, instead of having at the very end of it, instead of having a key that's cut this way, it's got a key that cut this way, which makes it fit the lock differently. Now, technically, from an organic chemistry standpoint, at the very end of the molecule of aripiprazole, typically there are, as far as I know, having looked at it, it's got 2 chloride atoms on this end ring structure. So, I said atoms, ions, chloride atoms on the end of the, at the end of the key, at the end of the molecule. That is aripiprazole. Brexpiprazole, they took the chlorine atoms off and made what's called a benzothiophene ring, which is a 5-sided ring that has a sulfur atom in it. Now, nobody cares about that. I think it's interesting that they can change with atoms, literally atoms, at the end of that thing to make the key fit so differently. Well, how is it different? Well, what's interesting to me is that even though it also reduces dopamine, that's what it's supposed to do in conditions where there's dopamine excess, and does for people, the dosing is completely different. On Abilify, you use 2 milligrams at the very, very lowest, which I typically don't even start with, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30. For brexpiprazole, you start at 0.5 and you go as high as 3. So it's an order of magnitude. It is 10 times more potent by just changing that little end from 2 little chlorine atoms hanging off the end of the ring structure to a new ring structure added to it that's got some carbon and a sulfur atom in there, which is called the benzothiophene ring. Again, too much organic chemistry. The point is that the key is made differently. The key is cut differently, and that dramatically changes the amount of medicine that you need to use for a normal treatment dose. Now, I said before, I don't have a lot of experience with Rexulti. Brexpiprazole is going to be the generic, and it's due to come out in April of 2026. So we'll see if that happens. Is it really going to be any better than Abilify? Hard to say. Is it going to be a situation sort of like we have with Celexa and Lexapro, where they are sister compounds, so to speak, but they are dramatically different in some people? Possibly. Same with Adderall and Vyvanse, where they are essentially sister compounds, but they're different in some people. Same with Effexor and Prestique. Is there going to be a big difference? We'll see. I obviously will be able to use it once it's less expensive, once it goes generic. But that's what they're talking about when they talk about the Rexulti boost. So going back to the same concept that we talked about with Zyprexa and added to Prozac, and we first learned that Zyprexa olanzapine was a very good add-on product for people that did not just have shortage of serotonin, but also had excess dopamine. They had more than one chemical problem, and the discovery that adding a dopamine suppressor to a serotonin booster was a good thing. Well, they say ask your doctor to add something, but in this particular ad, they sort of conveniently don't tell you that it is an antipsychotic. Don't even mention it. Now, I've taught you this on the videos before. If you don't have psychotic symptoms and we're using the medication, what's called off-label, to reduce your worry and your thoughts, it doesn't matter. You don't get the diagnosis of psychosis by taking a, quote, FDA-approved antipsychotic medicine. But I thought the ad was a little bit disingenuous because instead of saying Rexulti, brexpiprazole, which I immediately would have recognized as aripiprazole-like. I mean, the names are just almost identical. And in organic chemistry, the names of the generic medicines tell you how they function, tell you how they work. So if they would have put underneath the Rexulti, if they would have put brexpiprazole, I would have got it right away. Apparently, I have been watching golf and the King of Queens on Cozy TV for years and didn't even know that Rexulti was a sister compound to Abilify. It is, when you ask your doctor if you want to try something that is not $1,000 or $1,500 a month, you might as well try generic Abilify because it's very, very close. Something to talk to your doctor about. Certainly if I'm in that situation, and it happened with this gal I'm talking about, it started the video. She said, I need a boost. I said, okay, well, we could give you a boost, but how about we use something that's not going to cost, over $1,000 a month? She said, absolutely, I can't handle that. So we used Abilify. That happened. We'll see what happens with her. I hope it helps her. Again, the logic here is that if you have more than one chemical problem, one medication is typically not enough. You need a medicine for a chemical problem. And for people that have the combination of depression, depressed mood, low interest, low energy, hopeless, helpless, can't concentrate, thoughts of being dead, all of that stuff caused by low serotonin. If you also have a dopamine excess, then you need something to reduce your dopamine. And Abilify is a medicine that I talked about before, would be a very good medicine to add. And when it's generic, Rexulti, brexpiprazole, sister compound to Abilify, to aripiprazole, might be a good idea too. I'm going to get my experience as I try it. So that's what I have to say about the Rexulti boost and what that actually means. Thanks for coming to the channel today. I'm Dr. Dave Psychiatry. Thanks for coming to see me.